Hello everyone, welcome back to Let's Play Great Ace Attorney 2, Resolve. This is Vitafuser, and on our last episode, we heard from Madame Tuspells about what's been going on that links these two cases together. And now we found out Dr. Seath is in on it. So now it's time to hear from her and Drebber. Very well, I will uphold your request. Bailiff, send a subpoena with immediate effect addressed to Dr. Seath of the Forensic Investigation Team. The woman is compelled to attend on Her Majesty's orders. Alright then, you knocked Drebber and Dr. Seath. If they weren't colluding with one another, the crime could never have been committed. I'm just a stone's throw away. I can feel it. The truth behind all of this is about to come out. There they are. Thank you for your attendance at such short notice, Dr. Seath. I'm disappointed in you, Lord Van Zieks. You've completely betrayed the agreed policy of both Scotland Yard and the prosecutor's office. Betrayal is not in my nature, as long as the truth is in compromise. If it is, if there's even a hint of wrongdoing, then no matter whom it concerns or disgruntles, I will pursue the matter to the bitter end, as would any prosecutor worth his salt. Mr. Drebber, you took the victim's life by means of a machine that you constructed in your workshop. And Dr. Seath, as the investigating coroner, you were the first on the scene to examine the victim's body. It is the belief of the defense that you collaborated with each other and were both complicit in this crime. And where's your evidence? At present, we have no definitive evidence, but we do have a very significant clue. What are you talking about? I'm talking, of course, about the waxwork. The model of the killer known as the Professor, who was sentenced to death 10 years ago. You don't need to tell me. I witnessed the man's execution with my own eyes, and officially pronounced him dead. Not well enough. That remains to be seen. Is that so? According to newspaper reports from the time, on the night following his execution, the killer came back to life. Don't waste my time. And the sole witness to that mysterious event was you, Mr. Drebber, wasn't it? If what you saw in the graveyard that night 10 years ago wasn't some chilling fiction but reality, it would make you privy to a very great secret of Dr. Seath's. A secret so profound it could compel the coroner to agree to collaborate in your evil scheme, in fact. Mr. Drebber, tell the court. Tell everyone the truth of what you saw that night in Lowgate Cemetery. So he was the student who saw it. You can see the resemblance, actually, can't you? With the men in Madame Tuspells, I mean. Surely he's not going to claim that's really what he saw, especially not after all these years. He was a research student at the University of London, was he? And a bit too clever for his own good, if you ask me. What an interesting twist. When at the time, not one person would take me seriously. Yet now here we are, 10 years later, and suddenly my story matters. And in a court of law, too. Just like my sick moves. Very well then, if everyone so wishes. Let's be frank. I'll tell you the whole truth of what happened that night, for what it's worth. So, Mr. Drebber, your testimony, please, about the events of that night, 10 years ago. You will tell the court exactly what you stumbled across in Lowgate Cemetery. Yes, of course, as you wish. I never noticed that all those things were pluses and minuses on one side. The reason I was in Lowgate Cemetery all 10 years ago was for a spot of moonlighting, shall we say. Yes, the illustration in that paper was based on what I witnessed that night. But thinking back now, I realize I never actually saw the professor. Soon afterwards, I was visited by a young woman who sculpted a model of me from wax. Then I gave up on my dream of becoming a scientist, and it was all because of that newspaper article. Wait a minute. You're claiming you didn't actually see the professor now? Of course, you'd have to have a screw loose if you believe the corpse could come back from the dead. But you're saying this article is not worth the paper it's printed on. I think that would describe it perfectly, yes. If the details in the article aren't true, it nullifies your argument for why Mr. Andrever and Dr. Seath would have been working together. So he's discrediting himself to cripple my argument. Tell me, witness, you claim to have been in the cemetery on some auxiliary business. Can you elaborate? I was here to bust sick moves. That's right. Grave robbing, to be precise. As you know, Lowgate Cemetery is at the rear of Barclay Prison. So among students at the university, it had a reputation for being haunted by the ghosts of condemned convicts. Grave robbing, you say? Or you got a regular Dr. Frankenstein here? Yes, exhuming fresh corpses to sell is reasonably lucrative. Of course, I never laid a finger on any valuables buried with the dead. So you were one of the so-called resurrectionists, a particularly unpleasant scourge on society. Actually, my fellows and I went by another name. The Repurposers. That is quite beyond the pale. You would invite divine retribution, sir. Yes, well, I think I suffered retribution enough. The Daily Circus eventually unearthed my name and put it in print. It caused me a great many headaches. In the end, I had to leave the university. That was the only paper with the bad grace to identify me, unambiguously, I might add. I see. Out of interest, who drew the illustration for this article? Ah yes, that was the reporter who exposed me. He sketched that right in front of me as I described the scene. And let me guess. Obviously, as time ticked on, I bitterly regretted what I'd done. Claiming to have seen something I never truly saw. Foolish, very foolish. Well, counsel for the defense, you may proceed with the cross-examination now. Alrighty. Excuse me. Alright. Thinking back now, I realize I never actually saw the professor at all, though. Oh, really? I didn't mean to press that. I think I explained that already, didn't I? It's at the rear of Barclay Prison, so if it was room... I meant to present, not frickin' press. Yeah, we do. We sure do. Yeah, that's the one. I have to present that there. Not press it. Present, not press. There. Volume's down. Here we go. Sorry, Mr. Draper, but I don't believe that. Don't believe what? Your latest claim. You did see the professor on that night 10 years ago. Oh dear, we seem to be at odds. But I was there, and you were not. I know what I didn't see. The illustration with this article was drawn based upon what you told the journalist that you witnessed. A figure emerging from the tomb, wearing an iron mask. Yes, when the killer was tried 10 years ago, it was decided in the closed court's ruling that the man would wear the mask to hide his identity. It wasn't to be removed even during his execution and subsequent burial. Not even the prison wardens were to see the man's face. But obviously, the provision of this mask was not public knowledge. So, Mr. Drebber, as you've just heard, a lowly student of the University of London certainly wouldn't have known about the condemned man's mask. So unless you'd actually seen the professor that night, it's inconceivable the artist would have included the mask in that illustration. Order! Order! Well, Mr. Drebber. It's a vile scene, isn't it? If you look closely. And as I've already been at pains to point out, I was utterly petrified. Which is why I had it in my head I'd seen such a blood-curdling sight. But afterwards I came to my senses and realized that I'd been mistaken. You still say you didn't see it. If you're stubbornly sticking to that story, witness, then amend your testimony to explain exactly how you think your eyes deceived you. Of course, only too happy to oblige. I can't believe he's still not gonna concede the point. And what I, in fact, witnessed was a fellow grave robber at work. Oh, really? Now we press it. A fellow grave robber? What are you talking about? Well, I wasn't the only one busy in the cemetery that night, you know. Other body snatchers were at work. Of course, when I saw one emerging from the hole he dug, my heart very nearly stopped. So that's the terrifying sight I actually saw, you see. You're claiming it was just another student on equally insalubrious business as yourself. Many of the medical students wear metal masks to protect them from bacteria during dissections. Clearly the fellow was using such a mask to protect his anonymity. Wouldn't you say? But there's more to the story, isn't there? The article goes on to say, in the next second a gunshot rang out suddenly from behind. The bullet pierced the resurrected man's chest, whose breath then stilled once more. We might assume the next sexton discovered the miscreants at work, perhaps, and fired upon one of them. If a gravedigger had shot someone in the cemetery, I think it might have been rather big news, my lord. Yeah, well, I can only assume it was an embellishment bolted on later by the reporter.
Excuse me.
Alright, what do you got to say, Mr. Spells? Don't take it out on Mr. Sholmes. Ooh la la, pardon. I was lost in my thoughts all along. Would it be fair to say that Mr. Drebber's last remark was significant to you in some way? I thought it was a little strange, that is all. How Mr. Drebber could claim this now. If you don't mind me saying, madam, what are you talking about? Well, when I met you 10 years ago at your university dormitory, you recounted to me about your adventures in the cemetery, no? Including the gunshot. Stop! You might want to watch your tongue, you know.
Objection!
Have care, Drebber. That's no way to speak to a lady. Grr. Please, Madame Dispels. Carry on. Of course. According to what Monsieur Drebber told me at the time, He did hear a gunshot from behind him, and the bullet hit the condemned man. I said nothing of the sort. No, you were very explicit about the details. About the mask the figure was wearing. And the blood that spattered over you when he was shot. Enough. Shut up, woman. You're making all this up. Charmer, you are. That will do. Mr. Drebber? Yes. You refute the account just given by Madame Tuspels. I have no recollection of ever saying those things. Come on, do you really expect us to believe you? Control yourself, counsel. I will not permit baseless accusations in my courtroom. Right. Under the circumstances, I think it best you supplement your testimony with a statement to clarify your position on this witness. Very well. There was no gunshot behind me at all, nor any spattering of blood. Soon afterwards, I was visited by a young woman who sculpted a model of me from wax.
Hold it!
That young woman being Madame Tuspels, of course. Precisely. I must say, I didn't expect to run into her again like this 10 years later. As I have explained, I went by the name published in the article, and comme ça, I found the man. Yes, the article in the Daily Circus, I think you said. I was a poor student with barely a penny to my name at that time. And the young lady put £5 in front of me. So you readily consented to having a waxwork of yourself made and gave permission for it to be put on display. I did. I should sell what little I had to sell, I concluded. Ah oui, I remember now. I purchased something else from you that day, n'est-ce pas? Did you? I can't say I remember. What was it, madam? His camera. Ah. Oh yes, I made a point of taking it with me whenever I made an excursion in Denis Cemetery. You took a camera with you, sir. To what end? To record the details of the bodies I disinterred. I had no intention of ever visiting a graveyard again after that night, so I sold it. I see. But I still have it, monsieur. He is part of the special exhibit in my House of Horrors. I am very meticulous about such details. It is a Tuspels way. It would seem, then, that this is the very camera Dr. Drebber took with him to the Lowgate Cemetery in the night in question. Interesting. Alrighty. Ooh, there's blood. That's worrying. Yes, Father tells the time by rumblings of his stomachs now. He's given up having a watch. Poor Professor Mikotoba. Well, well, well. It's blood. On the bellows just here, there seems to be some very dark red stains. And that's blood. It looks like blood, actually. Oh my. I'm sure it's not what you're thinking. Ha ha. That's what we need. Oh, really? Guess what? I don't think so. You remember this camera? But that is a camera from the fateful night. Yes, we borrowed it from the House of Horrors. It's the camera you took with you to the cemetery that night, Mr. Drebber. And is that supposed to be significant? This kind of camera is rarely seen in our homeland, so my colleague and I were keen to examine it closely. We noticed the lens extends forwards on the ends of some bellows. Like this.
Hold it!
What's that? There, just on the bellows. It looks like a dark red stain. Ah! That's right. It's a rather conspicuous mark here on the bellows, in fact. Good lord, are you suggesting? Yes, my lord. It would appear to be a spatter of blood. Something that could be confirmed with a simple chemical test. Isn't that right, Dr. Seath? It would be difficult to determine if it was human blood and not the blood of some animal. But yes, to test whether or not it's blood at all is simple enough. I propose that Madame Dispel's testimony was correct, and that on the night in question 10 years ago, you were spattered with the blood from the gunshot wound. Well, And that furthermore, you really did witness the condemned professor emerging from his tomb. There's simply no way you could have forgotten such a traumatic experience. In other words, the only explanation is that you're trying to hide the fact you saw the professor that night.
Objection!
But why? Why would he want to do that? Well, not for his own gain, it would seem. For whose, then? Who could benefit? Mr. Drebber's obviously lying in order to protect somebody. My goodness, he's shielding someone. Yes, my lord, and clearly, it's someone who doesn't want the truth about the professor coming back to life to be exposed. Well, counsel, who is it then? Who is this witness trying to protect by lying about what he saw that night? It is indeed Courtney Seath.
Take that!
The obvious answer is Dr. Seath. Seath? Whatever do you mean? Imagine if the convict who'd been sentenced to death was not in fact killed. Imagine if that was to come to light. What are you insinuating? And imagine if the convict in question was the country's most hated masked murderer. If it was the professor, that would be an unprecedented scandal.
Objection!
This is beyond a joke. Need I point out that the dead cannot come back to life? What you're suggesting would mean that the execution never actually happened. Yes, that's exactly what it would mean.
Objection!
Once a man is sent to the gallows, he hangs. No one could escape. Not in Great Britain.
Objection!
But the fact is, there was a witness of the fact that the man did escape his hanging. If that were really true, counsel, the implications of misconduct would not stop at supervising coroner. It would take the honor of the entire judiciary, from the ground up. That's Pandora's box. We opened it up. And thankfully, she looks nothing like she does in Shin Megami Tensei Persona 1. Ugh. And it's exactly because of those monumental repercussions that Dr. Seath would consent to any demand made of her by someone who threatened to expose her secret. Even if it meant being complicit in a crime. You mean? I mean that Dr. Seath wasn't collaborating in Mr. Drebber's wicked scheme. She was coerced into collaborating in order to protect her decade-old secret. She switched the dead body of Mr. Asman with a waxwork model and fabricated the autopsy report. Ah! There's that kick. Lord Van Zyx, pray forgive my freshly filled hallowed chalice, and a whole raft of other discourtesies now. Goodness me! It's just the sort of tall-tale Londoners would enjoy, I grant you. An executed killer rising from the dead, a Scotland Yard cover-up, a conspiracy at the highest levels. So let me ask you one thing. What's that? If the condemned man really did emerge from his tomb that night, only to be shot in the chest, who pulled the trigger and disposed of him forever? How am I supposed to know? I wasn't there. We have too little information to work that out at present, I think. I couldn't agree more. The Old Bailey is no place for wild fantasies. And have you considered this, my learned Nipponese friend? Considered what? Do you realize just what a dangerous endeavor it would be to coerce this woman into such criminal activity? It's tantamount to declaring war on the entire British police force and judiciary. Quite. Hard to imagine any sum of money being offered for research could warrant it. To rely on some staged deception when so much is at stake would be madness. Well, I suppose. And this was no petty crime either. The victim was murdered. A man who'd already invested money in the venture and would be instrumental in future profits, too. Yes, I had no reason to kill Mr. Asmund at all. Or are you forgetting that his death results in me not receiving a single penny? The court is already aware of this contract between myself and the victim, no? There is contract. That is very true. I wonder who that contract's really with. The motive for this case runs deep, though. I can feel it. Using threats to force the head of the forensic investigation to cooperate is extreme, especially for a government grant he had no guarantee of receiving in the first place. If that was the aim, taking Mr. Asmund's life, which means Mr. Drebber's motive wasn't money at all. He was trying to kill Mr. Asmund. But why? What was his motive then? Your time is up, my learned friend. I'd say you have one last chance before the jury lose their patience with this charade. Let's see if you can back up your heady proposal, shall we? How do you explain why this engineer would throw all caution to the wind and threaten his own country? At this point, I'm not prepared to listen to more of this outlandish conjecture without proof. So, counsel, present your evidence. Alright, who exactly was Mr. Asmund and Mr. Drebber? There's a connection there that no one's seen yet, and I'm gonna have to present 2 pieces of evidence to show what it is. Yes, my lord. Alright, hang on one moment. Now we're gonna give it a try.
Take that!
Mr. Drebber, I have here the contract that you signed with Mr. Asmund. Yes, that's right. The very document, in fact. Proves I had no reason to kill the man. No, I'm afraid not. As it turns out, this contract actually helps to establish the real motive for the murder you committed. It does? Well, I never. What are you talking about? Read it again, you idiot. I'm not finished. In order to demonstrate what your motive really was, I need this contract. And one other piece of evidence. What other piece? Alrighty.
Take that!
It's this newspaper article, my lord. That was written 10 years ago, and every detail has been examined already. What can it possibly tell us? That dribble should never have been written. It's typical gutter press nonsense that means nothing.
Objection!
But there's something significant that this newspaper article and this contract have in common. Really. And it's that common link. That shows very clearly why you were determined to kill Mr. Odie Asmund. It seems the defense has uncovered something the rest of us have missed. So, my learned friend, point out what these two pieces of evidence have in common. Alrighty then, we'll do that next time.